I'm going to set the context of what nuclear in Australia currently looks like so we can understand what we're working with. I'll get the slides switched over. Awesome. So in my opening this morning, I acknowledged the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. Now, the term nuclear draws out a lot of emotive thoughts and feelings, and our First Nations people are not immune to that. Indigenous Australians have a colourful history with nuclear. First Nations scientists understood the power and energetic qualities of natural uranium and often had Dreamtime stories that depicted creatures around uranium-abundant areas like South Australia's Olympic Dam and up towards where Ranger Mine is in the Northern Territory. But there's also a painful past where communities were removed from lands due to atomic weapons testing through the 50s and 60s. So we can't ignore this context, even when we talk about peaceful uses of nuclear technologies. Now, this slide is an image of some First Nation stories around the nuclear weapons testing in South Australia. But today, nuclear science applications are being used to help preserve Aboriginal and Indigenous cultural heritage. Scientists from ANSTO, the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, work on many projects that centre on understanding, dating and preserving Indigenous heritage sites and artefacts across the country using nuclear techniques. There is so much more to nuclear that we need to talk about, and we need to be able to provide this information to Australians. Now, here is a picture of some of the extremes we really love here. We love extreme weather events. We love extreme animals. We even make extreme things through our policies, which can often be quite boring. But it's these extremes that inhibit our thinking, paralyse our decision-making, and stall our ability to progress and grow as a nation. Everyone has an opinion and voice, and often these voices are in loud caps and everywhere, all at once. And they're grounded in emotion and feeling rather than based in facts, evidence, and analysis. So for the everyday Australian, this is really unhelpful. We don't have time to sit and research and analyse. We're busy running a household and working and trying to keep a tight budget to schedule. We're trying to be on top of the next bingeable series so we can gossip about it at work. And we just want some downtime. Oh, I am flicking through these quick. As you can see, I'm a nerd, but I'm not an IT nerd. I'm a nuke. so forgive me for that. But I've always loved science and been curious on how things work. But my life took me down a different path. I went on to the military college and became a military officer where I would lead combat engineers for 20 years, which I loved. But it was about 15 years ago that the scientific world became very vocal about climate change. And so my nerd side got a bit curious. I couldn't understand why Australia never talked about nuclear power. Nuclear was a taboo word. If you mentioned it at meetings, people would tell you, shh, we just don't do that here in Australia. I often asked politicians when they visited my unit why we didn't talk about nuclear power, and they often dismissed me with it's too dangerous, Fukushima, Chernobyl, blah, 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 disaster. But that didn't make any sense to me when countries that are quite progressive, like Finland, Sweden, Canada, France, all had these growing nuclear programs. And countries like the UAE were embarking on new to nuclear programs, yet we still weren't willing to have a conversation. So what did I do? I went and studied nuclear engineering. That's how I went to answer this question. I'm a bit of a media skeptic, so I thought that if I learnt this for myself, I would actually see what was being hidden from me and why we weren't talking about nuclear. Spoiler alert though, it actually taught me how much we're not being told about so many other forms of energy that are in use across the world. I learnt about global energy installation accidents and incidents and how the reporting on these is often skewed in favour of one type of energy source over another. Yes, I might have been naive in thinking that our news gives us the facts as we need to hear them, but fear and emotion draws attention, and that's where the money goes. It means that technologies like nuclear power were being left behind, and we had this monstrous battle in trying to to fight and get the voices heard. Now, let's be honest, fear often comes from unknown. And due to our past decisions as a country, nuclear was never taught in schools. So we're dealing with a population that just doesn't know. So let's change that. So today I want to set us a challenge. Can we sit, listen, stick our bias to the side for one day, and have an open mindset? Can we be curious, learn, stretch our brains, think about nuclear from a different perspective? If each of us walk away with something that's a little bit new or a little bit different, it will help Australia get to know a little bit more and raise our nuclear literacy so that we can have better conversations, more educated conversations, and more importantly, be able to ask the right questions as we look into our future. But my presentation is titled, How Will the AUKUS Submarine Initiative Affect Australia and Our Region? And the answer to this really is twofold. Firstly, and most excitedly from my perspective, it has opened up the conversation about nuclear technology. I can say nuclear in a room and not have people hush and run away. So that's super engaging. I get engaged by young Australians all the time. They reach out through many different social media channels who just want to understand a bit more about nuclear. They've read a little bit about it, but they don't really know much. And it's fascinating to hear the questions they ask because they are coming without the baggage that my generation has. The second thing the AUKUS initiative will do is put a microscope on Australia and our ability to maintain a high standard for nuclear stewardship and regulation. And why is that? It's because we're a nuclear nation. We have been. We've been doing this, but largely in the shadows. But now there's a spotlight on us. For over 70 years, we have safely and securely run and regulated a world-leading research reactor through the ANSTO Opal reactor, which Dr. Marco will tell us more about later today. We've also had a high standard of regulation through our safety regulator, ARPANSA, and the Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office, ASNO. And these organisations are recognised internationally through the International Atomic Energy Agency as having a very high standard. And we, as Australians, hold many offices within Vienna that are in high regard. But Australia is also pretty active in the nuclear fuel cycle. But again, we don't broadcast this a lot. Where it all begins, mining and milling. Australia possesses 1/3 of the world's uranium resources, and we have been mining uranium since the 1950s. All our uranium oxide is mined, milled, and then exported overseas. And as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which keeps us in high regard internationally, we only export uranium for power generation. But currently, it's only legal to mine uranium in South Australia, Western Australia, and the Northern Territory. But I'll put a little caveat here, that's quite restrictive. It's only some mines that have got some approvals, and it's not as open as it could be. With the restriction on Russian high-enriched uranium fuel use in the USA, demand for uranium is set to grow, and we may have restricted how Australia can play a role in this. The next part of the nuclear fuel cycle is the conversion stage, so from uranium oxide or yellow cake into a uranium hexafluoride gas to support enrichment. Now, this doesn't occur in Australia. However, the next step, enrichment, whilst we don't do this in Australia, there's some amazing Australian scientific minds that have been involved in the enrichment game. The SILEX laser enrichment technology was designed in Australia and has now been exported over to the US to be commercialised. Fuel fabrication is next, and whilst we don't play a role in this, this is another potential opportunity for Australia. It's got electricity generation, but I'd say this is operational use. And as I said earlier, we've got 70 years experience running a research reactor. And this is something that will just grow as we start to operate nuclear-propelled submarines. Now, the final three parts of this nuclear fuel cycle we call the back end of the cycle, and it revolves really around fuel, spent fuel and waste. So spent fuel storage occurs in Australia. We currently store our spent fuel at Ansto at Lucas Heights after it has been reprocessed over in France. But we also need a long-term solution for this, and that's what the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency has been established to find long-term storage. However, we have also had commercialisation of radioactive waste. So Telus Holdings has commercialised a waste facility out in Sandy Ridge, Western Australia, and has accepted low-level radioactive waste. So we can do this. We've already done this. So Australia is already in the nuclear game, and we have been for a while. What sets us apart, however, is that we've established a culture within a small nuclear workforce, which is more than just a mindset. First and foremost, yes, it is our head. The term nuclear mindset gets thrown around a lot, but to truly embrace a nuclear culture, we need to be a lot more than consciously thinking with a nuclear safety lens. What holds us up are our two legs. And shout out here to Adi Patterson, my mentor. We need something that's sturdy and strong here. So, holding up our two legs are our operational practices that are safe and secure. We've done this. We now need to export this and expand this to a larger workforce. And next is our situational awareness. What are our partners in the region doing? What are other countries that are embarking on nuclear programs doing? How do we support one another to ensure that we are continuing to work safely and securely? Without this sort of culture being established, our nuclear workforce will be ungrounded, untested, and unable to withstand potential challenges. But we know this, and we can do this, and we're not starting from a zero starting block. We already have high-performing Aussies working globally in nuclear, representing science, engineering, regulation, legislation, mining, policy, social licence, security safeguards, and disarmament. The nuclear workforce makes a tangible difference in the lives of Australians, not just nationally, but globally. But we need this workforce to grow. So something near and dear to my heart, nuclear workforce. A lot of the work I do within Women in Nuclear Australia is trying to encourage young girls to embark on a nuclear career. And that's because by 2040, and that's only 16 years away, the submarine enterprise may require up to 20,000 trained professionals. And that's on top of our current demand for trained professionals. Now, we've got universities already across Australia, and UNSW is one of them, that are starting to embark on nuclear training pipelines. But it's not just about engineers and scientists, it's also about our policymakers, lawmakers, decision makers being trained within this space. Now, what we need to do to be able to do that is make sure that these organisations are being established with the right kind of support from industry and decision makers to encourage these young people to embark on these careers and have longevity more than just working in defence for their entire life. Now, as a nuclear security professional, I can't finish my speech without talking about nuclear security. It's something that I am very passionate about trying to raise the awareness of. When we talk about nuclear security in our region, there are about 30 countries globally that are looking at nuclear programs, but domestically in the Indo-Pacific region, we have research reactors in Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and North Korea, with China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Pakistan all having well-established nuclear power programs. And China is investing significantly on expanding their program. They have a really long-term plan to really nuclearise the country. But closer to home, there are countries that are starting to indicate that they're interested in expanding nuclear power. Countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia are all investigating nuclear power programs and options for their country. Where the nuclear security part comes in, from a national security perspective, a lot of these offers are coming from Russian or Chinese state-owned companies, which provide finances and fuel services. And why do I highlight this? Energy security and the reliance on other states. And if we learn anything from COVID, reliance on other states for supply chain comes with vulnerabilities. And in our region, if countries are reliant on nuclear fuels from other countries and their energy security is reliant on that, and we're unable to support them if something happens, that loses our ability to influence within the region. And we will have consequences for Australia and its reputation and our ability to work with partner nations. Now, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I don't think we can afford to be left behind if our regional partners are looking to embark on nuclear programs.